Okay, this week is Parshas Truma. We've come to the last section of Sefer Shmos. Sefer Shmos is divided into several sections. Rishonim discuss it. We started off by we were in Egypt, mentioned the 70 people who went down to Egypt, that we multiplied in Egypt, were then enslaved, and then Moshe was born, the whole story of Moshe going out, marrying Zipporah, him coming back, and the plagues. We're then released from Egypt. Shem takes us out, the Pesach story, and then we have on the seventh day, which we have as Shvi Shel Pesach, the seventh day of Pesach, we have the crossing of the sea. And then we go to Mount Sinai via parts of the desert where various mitzvahs are given to us. We discussed those all in the last few weeks. That took us to Parshas Yisro is the Sinai experience, and last week's Parsha Mishpatim, all the laws that we learned, all 53 different halachas that we learned. The rest of the book of Shmos is about the Mishkan, the tabernacle that was built in the desert, except for a very small section, about, let's call it half of Parshas Kisisa in the middle Parsha, where it discusses the tragedy of the golden calf. Other than that, we've got Parshas Truma this week, which discusses almost all the implements and the vessels and the walls and the roof of the Mishkan, which we will discuss. Next week's Parsha Tetzaveh covers essentially the garments of the Kohanim, goes through all the different garments that the Kohanim wore, and then talks about the Tamid offering, the offering that was brought every day. Then we have the golden Mizbach as well. Then we have Parshas Kisisa, which is, there's a census that's done. It talks about Trumas. Some of the other implements, the kior, the oil, the incense that was burnt. It then designates Betzalel and Oholiav to be the people who would be the builders of the Mishkan. Talks about Shabbos, Moshe receiving the tablets, and then the whole story of the golden calf. And we will come back to that, please God, in 2 weeks' time. Moshe coming down, smashing the tablets, going back up to Hashem, and the whole story of Moshe going up and down on Mount Sinai over the next 120 days. From Shavuot, Moshe went up for 40 days, which is the end of last week's Parsha, ended that he went up and down. Went up for 40 days and 40 nights. He came down, had the golden calf. He went back up again for another 40 days, came down, went back up again for another 40 days, and finally came down on Yom Kippur, which is when Hashem said, Salachti kivarecha, I've forgiven you. And then the final two parshas, Vayakel, again talks about Shabbos, but essentially talks about the contributions and the actual construction of the Mishkan, how it begins, what they actually did, each of the various things that we will discuss this week, next week, how they were made, each of the different parts, how it was all put together. And then Parshas Pekudei counts all the implements and exactly what was donated, how much material was used for each of the parts of the Mishkan and the garments of Aaron, the Kohen Gadol, and the other Kohanim. And then we're told to set up the Mishkan. The Mishkan is set up, and Hashem's glory rests in the Mishkan. That is the end of Sefer Shmos. So we've got 4.5 parshas, essentially, around the Mishkan. This was a building, or structure. It wasn't a building, it was a temporary structure. It was a tent with walls that was built, essentially lasted for the 40 years we were in the desert. It then moved into Israel for a number of years. Then we had Mishkan in Shiloh, which was still a Mishkan, but a building in the town of Shiloh. And if you go to Shiloh today, the shul, the main shul in Shiloh, is constructed with it looks like the Mishkan, because we know that's where Shiloh was. There's evidence that there was a Mishkan there, that there were sacrifices there, evidence of a wall around the town, and so that's all been discovered in the last decade or so. It was there for 369 years. It was in 2 other places, and then eventually King David was given the command to build the Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim, That was built by his son Shlomo, King Solomon. It was that Beis Hamikdash lasted 410 years. It was destroyed by the Babylonians. The Jews were exiled into Babylon for 70 years. We were given permission by the king to go back and rebuild. He then removed that permission, and then eventually, and the Purim story happened in that period of time where we didn't have the Beis Hamikdash. The Jews were given permission by Esther's son Daryavesh to go back and rebuild the second temple. The whole story with Ezra and Nehemiah and the second temple being rebuilt, and that lasted 420 years. That was destroyed in the year 70 of the Common Era, so nearly 2,000 years ago, 1,900 years ago, and we wait for that to be built every single day. We daven. About a third of our daily Shmona Esra is about the rebuilding of the temple, the coming Mashiach, and the rededication of Jerusalem. The Jerusalem of not the phenomenal Jerusalem city that we have today, one of the most incredible, beautiful cities in the entire, one of the most beautiful, incredible city in the world. In Jerusalem of Third Temple times is going to be so far superior to what we have now, we will not understand the difference. And we look forward, we're davening for that every single day. And so let's go through Parshas Terumah and see what was this Mishkan, what was it about, what did it have in it? Because there were very specific instructions given to Moshe. There's a question as to when was the Mishkan commanded to be built, and what was the reason for the Mishkan. We're not going to go into that in any detail at all today. Essentially, there are opinions that say the Mishkan was as a result of the golden calf. There are other opinions say, no, the Mishkan was going to be built anyway. The golden calf changed things around, and Hashem's presence was different to us after we had sinned at such a high level. Well, please God discuss the golden calf in 2 weeks' time. But just to remember, the whole nation seems to have been involved with the golden calf. And when you look at the numbers of people involved, it was very, very few people. Of the 3 million odd Jewish people, it was a few thousand. And it essentially was the Erev Rav, which are the people that Moshe brought, that Hashem said, they're your people. Not Hashem's, be Hashem. Moshe said, these people want to join us. We need to be very, very careful when we get people joining the Jewish people, which is why it is so difficult to convert. We don't encourage conversions. If somebody is honest and committed to it, they will be allowed to convert. They will go through a very stringent training process over a number of years, as we all know, and then will become fully fledged Jews. As we discussed 2 weeks ago, Torah was offered to the different nations of the world. It's brought down, so who are the people who are converting through the ages? We've had converts almost at all times. Who were the people that were converting? Each of the nations that refused to receive the Torah, they said, has got something in it that doesn't agree with us. There were people within those nations that would have accepted the Torah, and generally those neshamas are the ones that stood at Mount Sinai essentially and rejoined the Jewish people over time. That's the people who convert. When Mashiach comes, there will be no more conversion. Similarly, in the time of King Shlomo, there was no conversion, because when the Jewish people are at a level where we are totally connected to Hashem and the world recognizes that we're connected to Hashem, then we can't have conversion, because it's too late at that point. So anybody who joins us now is in a great position, because Mashiach is coming very, very soon. Last week's Parsha said it's going to be a slow process, the conquering of the land of Israel. We can discuss it, but it says it's going to take time, slowly, slowly. And that's what we're going through right now. They call this the Chevlei Mashiach, the birth pangs of Mashiach. And just as a mother goes through pain and suffering, unfortunately, we have to go through that as well. But our goal is to connect to Hashem and to daven that He brings Mashiach and takes away the pain, particularly the pain we've had over the last few days, because we've seen Hashem's hand miraculously if we open our eyes, and we've also seen pain of some very, very evil, lowest of low people in the world, the things that they did, particularly to do with delivering 4 hostages, 2 babies, and an elderly gentleman. It's unacceptable, and we just hope and pray that the global media wake up and realize who these people that we're dealing with are and how they have, over the last decades, many decades, infiltrated into the Western media in such a horrific manner. And so we just look for positivity and we look for unity. But let's look at Parshas Terumah. So Hashem comes along, Vaydaber Hashem and Moshe Lemor. Hashem says to Moshe, saying, this is a verse that we're going to have many, many times in the Torah. It hasn't appeared very often yet, but from now on till the end of the Torah, it appears many times. And the way the rabbis explain that is, Hashem spoke to Moshe, Lemor, saying, whenever it says that, it means teach it over to Jewish people. Say it over and tell the Jewish people, this is what I am commanding. Now, if we looked at how many times it appears, we said we've got 613 mitzvahs. If we looked at how many times Vaydaber Hashem and Moshe Lemor appears, it's significantly more than 613. Whenever Hashem tells Moshe, it's not necessarily a mitzvah in itself. It's Hashem telling Moshe, tell the Jewish people this message. These are the things that they have to do. And then he goes on and he says, Daber el bnei Israel, speak to the children of Israel. Vayikchu li truma me'es bnei ish asher yidvenu liboy. Speak to the bnei Israel and let them take for me a portion from every man whose heart motivates him. Tikhu es trumasi, take my portion. They must take my portion. So normally we say, give me something, not take for me something. And the word truma there, we know truma is what is taken from produce and given to a kohen, the first percentage of produce. The Torah doesn't tell us how much truma to give, but when a farmer has harvests his field, he has to take truma and maisa. Truma is the first portion of it. We usually say 40th or a 50th is given to the kohen, 2% or thereabouts. Then you have to take maisa, which is given to the Levi, which is 10% of the balance. And then the Levi has to give 10% of what he has to the kohen. So the kohen and the Levi are given essentially a stipend to live on. Because, and we will please God come back to this, the Leviim were given 48 cities around Eretz Israel. In Eretz Israel, there are 48 cities of the Leviim. Those 48 cities acted as cities of refuge for anybody who was an inadvertent murderer. We didn't throw people in jail because jail is a horrific system which doesn't help criminals. The way the Torah worked was somebody went to a city of refuge and they were with the Leviim, who were the teachers. And if they had to overcome some issue, they were helped. Similar to last week's parsha, at the beginning of the parsha we spoke about slaves, a Jewish slave. How does a person become a Jewish slave? Well, they stole something. They couldn't pay it back. And so they had to sell themselves. Who were they sold to? They were not sold to the person that they stole from. They were sold to an upright family. So that they would spend 6 years with that family, learning how to behave properly, so that when they were freed in the 7th year, they would go back to society. If they had a wife, the wife and children, the wife and children would come with them. If they were single, they left single. There was a whole way of rehabilitating criminals, putting them in good families who bought them. What type of slave were they? Well, it says if the master was eating steak for dinner, the slave had to eat steak. And if the master had a fancy bed that was push button and up and down and everything else, the slave had to have a fancy bed with push buttons that went up and down. The slave had to have at least what the master had. And if the master only had one pillow, that went to the slave. We're not talking about slaves as in we understand people being shackled and enslaved. We're talking about people who have sold themselves because they've done something wrong. They couldn't afford to repay their theft. And that's the message here. Truma is something that we take. We don't give. What does take mean? It means when I give truma, when I give a donation to somebody, and I give tzedakah, it means I'm actually taking it. Because I'm taking it to keep it for myself. What I give away in my lifetime is mine forever. What I spend in this world is gone. And so by giving, it means I'm actually taking, because I'm receiving something that's mine forever. It's attached to me, which is the message of giving tzedakah to worthy causes. Obviously, give charity to wrong causes. That's not tzedakah. Tzedakah means, and it doesn't only have to be Torah causes and Jewish cause. It can be any cause that is worthy, but we need to assess what's a worthy cause. So Hashem then says, okay, so you're going to take this. What are you going to be taking that will become yours forever? Well, gold, silver, copper, turquoise, purple, scarlet wool, linen, goat's hair. And if you look at the order of all, and red dyed ram skins, tachash skins, it's a type of animal. They say the tachash was a multicolored unicorn. That's brought down in Midrash, what that means. It was a multicolored skin of an animal. Acacia wood, oil for illumination, spice for anointment, aromatic incense. And then if you look at all of those, they go down in order, gold being the most expensive, silver, all the way down to incense and oil and the like. And then it brings shoham stones and stones for the settings of the ephod and the breastplate, which we're going to learn about in next week's parsha. Very, very precious stones that were for the Kohen Gadol. Those were specifically worn by the Kohen Gadol. The other things were all part of the Mishkan itself, or the daily operations of the Mishkan, being the spices and the oil and the incense. So all of these things were Jewish people were told to come and donate that. We're going to learn in a few weeks' time how they donated and how quick it was. Not for now. And then Hashem says, possibly one of the most famous verses in light of the Mishkan, in light of the way Hashem dwells within the Mishkan, it says, "V'asu li mikdash, make for me a sanctuary, v'shachanti b'soicham, so that I may dwell among them." Doesn't mean that I may dwell in it. It means Jewish people make a sanctuary, make a Mishkan for Hashem, so that Hashem can dwell in us. That if we connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then He connects directly to us. The Mishkan is there as a tool to bring down Hashem's presence. We don't have a Mishkan in our times. We don't have a Beis HaMikdash in our times. So therefore, the way we behave, our homes, our shuls, our Batei Medrash, where we learn Torah, where we have guests, where we just sit around the table and talk about Hashem, that becomes our Mishkan. That becomes Hashem's dwelling place on earth. Because Hashem's Shekhinah is present, is hidden at the moment. And as it's hidden, we need to bring it down. And the only place we can bring it down is within ourselves, within our hearts, and within our good deeds. Our lave is the place where Hashem's Shekhinah needs to come down. Please God, we'll come back to all of that later. But let's go through what is in the Mishkan. Hashem says, I'll show you what's in the Mishkan, and what all the vessels will look like and what they're all going to do. So the very first vessel that the Torah talks about is the Aron, the Ark. What was the Ark? The Ark was a box of wood. It had a gold outlay and a gold inlay. It was three boxes essentially that were put together. It had a lid made of wood and gold, and on top of the lid were two kruvim, what we call in English cherubs. Now, we unfortunately have a picture of kruvim as little fat children with wings, little angelic children. That's not necessarily wrong, but that picture I think most of us have in our heads probably comes from Christian Bible drawings that we might have seen. It says about these kruvim that they were a boy and a girl looking at each other with their wings spread out, and I'm going to show you a picture in a moment, art scroll drawing of a depiction of what the whole Aron looked like. It says when Hashem and the Jewish people were close and connected, remember these are pure gold sitting on top of a gold box. These two angelic figures would be looking at each other with their wings touching each other. When we were distant from Hashem, when we weren't doing what Hashem wanted, they flipped around and looked the other way. And at various times in the year, they would open the curtain in the Mishkan or in the Beis HaMikdash, and people could see in, and they would be able to look in and see how these keruvim were looking at each other, and whether they were facing each other or not. It says, brought down by Chazal, when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, people had a vision of the keruvim. Now, the ark was actually hidden away before the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, but there was a vision that they saw Now, we were at our lowest of low when the temple was destroyed. Hashem said, I can destroy the Jewish people completely, rather destroy the bricks and mortar of the temple. The Aron was hidden away, and but it says that the Kruvim, even though we were so far away, we were about to be sent into exile into Bavel, the Kruvim were hugging each other. To show that the relationship, Hashem still has that relationship with us at all times. It's just we need to make sure that we are connected to Hashem. So, first picture of the day, I'll just show it to the screen first. There is the ark. Okay, you will notice it has the Kruvim on top. It has a lid, the 3 boxes. And what we didn't discuss are the 2 poles on the side with golden rings. The poles were also made of acacia wood, plated in gold. And they were used to carry, and I use that term loosely, the ark, because the ark carried itself. There was a whole story of King David where he was bringing the ark on a wagon to Jerusalem, and it fell, and a Levi went to try and grab it, and there was huge flow-on effect from that. And so the ark was something that carried itself. It did not need us to be carried. In fact, it did not take up any physical space, because that's the place where Hashem kisses the earth. Hashem's presence, his Shekhinah, touches the earth, so to speak, and where you can sense it perfectly. In Jerusalem, in the Beis HaMikdash, well, in the Mishkan as well, but the ark sat in the Holy of Holies, the Kodesh Kadoshim, the holiest part. The Kohen Gadol was the only person who ever went in there, and he only went in there once a year on Yom Kippur. He went a few times during the day, but one day a year, it was the only time that anyone went into the Kodesh Kadoshim where the Aron was. The dimensions of the area of the Kodesh Kadoshim, which we'll get to later on, but the way it's described and the way the ark is described, the ark took up no space because it was this thing that this vessel that was between physical and spiritual. It was beyond the physical. It had inside it, they put the tablets that Moshe brought down, as well as the broken tablets. So Moshe came down in Parshas Ki Sisa. We learned that he broke the tablets. He went up. He got new tablets from Hashem. Both sets of tablets were put into the ark, and the Sefer Torah was put either into it or next to it as well in the end. So that is the Aron, the central piece of our observance, essentially. And again, it was so holy that only the Kohen Gadol went in there one day a year. Nobody else went in there. They used to go in for maintenance. There's stories about how they'd use pulley systems from the top down to maintain it, paint it, clean it, whatever needed in the Kodesh Kadoshim, but people did not, you could not just walk in and out of there. It was holy. And in fact, Aaron's 2 sons, Nadav and Avihu, walked into the Mishkan and died because they brought a service that was foreign. Anybody who did that. When the temple was destroyed, Hashem's presence, his Shekhinah, had left there, and it lost its holiness to some degree, and therefore people, the Gemara brings stories of what Titus Arasha, we know the Arch of Titus in Rome, what he did in the Beis HaMikdash, beyond the scope of discussion here, but it was horrific, the things that he did, and because Hashem's Shekhinah had, so to speak, departed. Hashem had removed his actual presence from there. And today, and since the destruction of the temple, Hashem's presence is in the Western Wall, in the Kosel HaMaravi. It's brought down in the Navi that Hashem's presence is there. But if you go to the Kotel HaKatan, which is not the main part of the Kotel, further along, in line with where the Golden Dome is today, is a small part of the Kotel. The original Kotel is all still there because it says never be destroyed, but they've built houses and buildings onto it. But they have been able to excavate a small portion of it, which is directly opposite the Kodesh Kadoshim. And if a person who is sensitive and connected to Hashem in many ways can feel Hashem's presence there. It's a totally different feeling to anywhere else. Some people feel in different places, but you can actually, it's palpable. It's a physical experience. Okay, so we discussed the Aron and the cover with the Kruvim. interestingly enough, these kruvim, the very first time kruvim are mentioned in the Torah, is all the way back in creation. Jump there quickly. If I can find it quickly. Adam and Chava were in the garden, and after they had sinned with the fruit, eating the fruit, with the serpent, then they were banished from the garden. And it says there, right in chapter 3, at the end of chapter 3 of Bereshis, it says, Hashem, God banished him from the Garden of Eden to work the soil which he was taken. And having driven out the man, he stationed at the east of the Garden of Eden, at the east of the Garden of Eden, the kruvim and the flame of the ever-turning sword to guard the way to the tree of life. So these kruvim were now guards. That's the very first time we mention them. They described as destructive angels in that point in time. Whereas here, as we just described them, they childlike, angelic figures. How can we kind of connect the two together because the first time something is mentioned in the Torah is that's its essence. Well, these are kruvim who are, I've just seen here, the kruvim, these were destructive angels who were just have a responsibility of preventing man from discovering and re-entering the garden. I'll just see here. This is Stone Chumash. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, who was a great rabbi in New York, died about a quarter of a century ago, noted that the term kruvim is also used to describe the sacred angel-like children that were carved from the cover of the Holy Ark. Here, they are destructive and they represent the life-giving powers of the Torah. So that's talking about in the Aaron. This alludes to paramount importance of education. Children can become holy or destructive depending on how they are reared. Okay, I noticed that before. What I was going to say about them is kruvim can take the form of how we are. If we behave in an appropriate way, then they are angelic, childlike, beautiful, connected to Hashem. If we behave inappropriately, then they can be destructive forces, because Hashem looks at us and he looks at us measure for measure. What we do, Hashem replicates. The way we want to live our lives is the way Hashem treats us. And so that doesn't answer Moshe's question of why do it appear that wicked people flourish in this world and do so well. That's a separate question. But we need to know that Hashem looks at us, and if we make the connection, he makes the connection back to us. Okay. The next implement discussed is the shulchan. Shulchan, the table. What was this table? It was a table which had two stacks on top of it where they would put what was known as the lechem hapanim, the showbread. There were 12 loaves of bread that were put on the table with incense on top of it. It had spoons and it had implements to hold the incense. Those loaves of bread were brought in on a Shabbos, and the previous weeks that were sitting there the whole week were taken out. Now the loaves were baked either Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. The Mishnah discusses when they could have been baked, because if it was Yom Tov, they couldn't be baked. So just say, and in temple times, they did have 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. So let's say Rosh Hashanah was Thursday, Friday, which we can still have in our calendar today. They would have to bake them on Wednesday. So they were baked on Wednesday, changed over on Shabbos, and then the old ones were taken out. There had to be showbreads on the table. They had a ceremony where they pushed the old ones out and the new ones in. And the old ones, they were eaten by the Kohanim. The Kohanim changed shifts every week. They had a different family of Kohanim coming every week. That group of Kohanim that were going out shared them with the ones coming in. There was a division of how it was done. But the bread that they ate was as fresh as it was the day it was baked, even 8 or 10 days before that. So it was baked Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, put in place on Shabbos. It was still steaming, as if it just come out of the oven. And you could smell it, and it was an incredible thing. So the shulchan itself, also made from wood, covered in gold. That's what it looked like. So you can see there's the table on the bottom. It had a little crown around it with the staves to carry it and the two structures to hold the showbread. All right, we get very technical. Acacia wood covered in gold. Now, the next implement in the Beis HaMikdash was the menorah. Now, we all know a menorah from Hanukkah. The menorah we have from Hanukkah is 8 branches plus 1, because it's 8 branches for the 8 days of Hanukkah plus 1 for the Shamash, because you're not allowed to get benefit from the Hanukkah lights, therefore you have to have another light at a higher level. This, and it's based, the whole Hanukkah story is about relighting the menorah. This menorah in the Beis HaMikdash was 7 branches, and it was just straight 7 branches. The one light was always on. It was made of pure gold. Moshe could not understand how it could be made, and Hashem had to show him in fire, whatever that means, how to make the menorah from a piece of pure gold. There is a gold menorah in Jerusalem today. It is worth millions and millions of dollars. It's sitting right now in the Rova, in the square in the old city. It was previously at the top of the stairs as you go down to the Kotel. It was built by Mahan HaMikdash, the Temple Institute. The problem they had with that menorah, if you make something out of pure gold with that weight, it cannot hold up its arms. And therefore they have been used some alloy, as far as I understand, in the arms to make sure that they stay up, because gold, being a soft metal, will just sag. So there are 2 depictions of the menorah. The one that they bring here is based on a drawing that Rambam did that people have picked up on. The drawing that we have, which is the menorah of Eretz Israel, the state of Israel, the rounded menorah, is generally how we understand it. And if you look at the Arch of Titus, on there is a depiction of a slave carrying a menorah, which is rounded. So was it round? Was it straight like that? We don't know. We will find out, please God, very, very soon. But both ways halachically work. Could Rambam's drawing have been that's the way he drew? Possibly. Could it be that he was showing what it could have been? We don't know. But interestingly enough, Chabad have picked up on the Rambam version, and all their Chanukah menorahs are based on that. So whenever you see a Chabad house, their menorahs are all going to be straight. Either way, the menorah had different emblems on it, cups and circles, spheres and flowers. It was the most beautiful implement. It had, it says, a knob under 2 branches, and the whole explanation of it, I'll just read through some of the English quickly. Make a menorah of pure gold, hammered out shall the menorah be. Its base, its shaft, its cups, its knobs, and its blossoms shall be hammered out. 6 branches shall emerge from its sides, 3 of the menorah on one side, 3 branches of the menorah on the second side. 3 cups engraved like almonds on the one branch, a knob and a flower, and 3 cups engraved like almonds on the next branch, a knob and a flower. So for the 6 branches that emerge from the menorah, and on the menorah shall be 4 cups engraved like almonds, its knobs and its flowers, a knob, etc., etc. Extremely complicated design. And that's what Moshe said to Hashem, I can't understand this. Please show me what it looks like. And Hashem showed Moshe in fire what the menorah was. The menorah gave off light from the Beis HaMikdash. The Beis HaMikdash, normally we have windows in a room that brings light in. The menorah of the Beis HaMikdash gave the light outwards. It was a light from Hashem going outwards. So the structure, let's keep going in the order of the Torah. The next thing the Torah talks about are the curtains of the Mishkan, because the Mishkan itself was covered over. In the Beis HaMikdash, it was obviously a closed building, certainly the part of the inside part of it. So let's just discuss the structure. You had 3 parts to the Beis HaMikdash and 3 parts to the Mishkan. There was the big courtyard. In the Beis HaMikdash times, that was what we call the Erzas Noshim, the women's courtyard, going into the men's courtyard, where in standing in there was the big altar, which we will discuss Um, the next section was the actual building in the Beis HaMikdash, which housed the Kodesh, the holy, and the Kodesh Kadoshim, the holy of holies. In the Kodesh, you had the menorah, and you had the shulchan, and you had an altar, a small gold altar, which we discuss next week, I think. Yes, next week we discuss the golden altar. But those three vessels were in the holy part of the Beis HaMikdash, and only Kohanim could go in there. So the altar itself, only Kohanim were allowed to go up on and bring the sacrifices. Into the build, and from that point forward, only Kohanim could go into the building. And then the Holy of Holies, which had the Aron in it, the Kohen Gadol was the only one who was allowed in there. And so if we look at this picture here, this just shows, and we're going to come back to this in a bit of detail, this just shows the Aron in the Kodesh Kadoshim. That's this part here. And it shows the Shulchan, the Menorah, and the golden altar in the Kodesh. And then this area here is the Mishkan. This is the Kodesh, the holy part, and that's the Kodesh Kadoshim, the Holy of Holies. And so this whole section was the Mishkan, and then outside of that was a courtyard. So the next part of the Torah, in chapter 26, discusses the covers of the tabernacle. Make 10 curtains. There were curtains around it. Now we mentioned in the beginning what type of fabrics they used: turquoise, purple, and scarlet wool, woven design of kruvim. So they actually wove it in a way that there were pictures in the weave of kruvim in the curtains. The length of a single curtain is 20 cubits, 20 amos, width of 4 amos. Each of the curtains measured. There were 5 curtains attached to one another. They had to make loops of wool to join them. It tells you exactly 50 loops in each curtain. It tells you step by step how they had to make all of these curtains. Make curtains of goat hair for a tent over the Mishkan itself. So that's put a tent of goat hair. 11 of these were made. It describes bit by bit how every single part all fitted together and how it was all covered over. And remember, each of these things, this is quite a big structure. Each of these things were very heavy, and they had to be taken apart, transported, and then put up again. And in the first week, Moshe Rabbeinu himself was the one who did it by himself, which we'll discuss when it was set up, but we'll discuss partially a little bit today. All right, the next thing we discuss, we're at Revi in the Pasha, is the Krushim. A keresh is a board. So what are these boards? They had to take planks of acacia wood, stand them upright. They were 10 amos tall. 10 amos is about 5 meters, just to put it into perspective. And they were an amma and a half each width. And each plank had 2, what they call tenons, in the bottom, because they went into silver holders underneath. I lost my page marker where that picture was. Here it is. So that is a picture. Just look at this one of each of the boards. So an upright board with, this is just from the side angle, with a cutout in the bottom that went into a silver holder for it. So if you looked at that from the front end, there were 2 of these going down into each of those silver holders. They were joined together, and we'll come back to this, by different poles to hold the whole thing in place. And that we'll discuss in a moment. So that was the walls, that planks of the tabernacle. They sat down in the silver sockets, and they were put together. They had, let's discuss now. They had bars going through them. It's an interesting Rashi. I might come back to that Rashi as to exactly how many bars there were. But essentially you had a bar at the top and a bar at the bottom, which were held on by rings. And then you had a central bar. There was a hole drilled in the middle of each of the planks. And you had a central bar going through there, giving this whole structure rigidity. There were 48 of these pillars, these beams, 20 on each side and 8 across the western side. The eastern side was the entrance. There were three different beams in the entrance. There were three things in the entranceway, but that was the doorway. So you had 48 of these beams around, these krashim or planks around, circling the Mishkan, and then a cover over the top of part of it. There was also a curtain, a paroiches. We have a paroiches in front of the Aron Kodesh. You notice similar words were used because our shul is a mini Beis HaMikdash, and therefore we have certain things in the shul that represent those things in Beis HaMikdash. Not that the shul can ever replicate a Beis HaMikdash, and not that the shul is going to be there forever in terms of that. There will be a Beis HaMikdash rebuilt for whatever purpose Hashem decides. We know that is coming, but our shul right now is a place where we elevate and connect to Hashem like we did in the Beis HaMikdash. There was a curtain between the Kodesh and the Kodesh Kadoshim, between the Holy and the Holy of Holies, to separate across that. And then there was a screen across the front, as I said, on the eastern side. If you think about the Western Wall today, the Western Wall is the outer retaining wall of the Temple Mount. It's not the temple itself. The temple itself sat behind that, and the walls of the temple were even, further into or higher up on the Temple Mount. Then the Torah at Shishi discusses the altar, where we brought the animal offerings, which sat in the courtyard outside of the Beis HaMikdash. The altar was 5 amas in length, about 2.5 meters. When we built the Beis HaMikdash, it was significantly bigger than that. And the Mishnah and the Gemara in various places discusses the size of the Mishnah, how big it was there. This was quite small. It was 2.5 by 2.5 meters or thereabouts, depending what an amma means. It was square. It was 3 amas tall. That's about 1.5 meters tall. And we learned in the end of Parshas Yisro, you needed to have a ramp to get up there, not steps. On the corner of it, you had 4 what the Torah calls horns. And it was made of wood covered in copper, but it was hollow, and they filled it with sand in the middle. Again, it had a meshwork around it, and it also had 2 poles to be able to carry it. It was a hollow box that was filled with sand so that it could handle fires on top of it with animals being burnt. In the temple that was much bigger, it was made of stone or bricks, and it was a significantly large structure. And then finally, at Shvi of this week's Parsha, it talks about the Chatzer, the courtyard. And I did have a place marking of what the courtyard looked like, but I can't see that now. So the courtyard had lace hangings of a courtyard of twisted linen. It was 100 amas for one side. It had 20 pillars and sockets, and 100 amas on the other side. So on the north and the south side was 100 amas. The width of the courtyard on the west side was 50 amas. So it was, if we think about it, approximately the size of an Olympic swimming pool. That was the whole Mishkan, 50 meters by 25 or thereabout meters. So if you think about an Olympic-sized swimming pool, that was the entire Mishkan. The Beis HaMikdash itself is not significantly bigger. I haven't got all the numbers in front of me right now, but it's not a huge amount bigger than this. But it wasn't a huge building. But the Beis HaMikdash, it says that on Yom Kippur, everybody was there, all the Jewish people who were there, millions of people, and nobody ever was unable to prostrate completely, bow down, lie down on the ground. They always had enough space around them that nobody ever infringed on them. Because, as I said, just like the Aron was metaphysical, was above this world, so too was the Beis HaMikdash. Yerushalayim expands. How do we see that in our times? When you have a Shabbos lunch and you're ready for 22 guests and the table's full and 2 more arrive and then another 2 more arrive, and they all miraculously fit in. That's the way we see it here. Achnasas Orchim is One of those mitzvahs where we see those miracles that Hashem does. There's many, many other times where we can see it. But this whole structure was, as we said at the beginning of the Parsha, Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, make for me a mikdash. And it says, V'asu li mikdash v'shanti b'soicham. Make the sanctuary for me, says Hashem, and I will dwell among them. I'm going to dwell within the Jewish people. Hashem's goal in all of this is that his presence is going to dwell not in the structure of the Beis HaMikdash or the Mishkan, but within our hearts, with everything to do with us. Hashem is with us. And so this whole structure is all about truth. It's about emes. It's about bringing down into the world the absolute emes of Hashem, that he is in charge of everything. And Hashem runs the world in a way of emes. So we've got more show and tell somewhere. Lots of papers today. Aha. So the word emes, we may have discussed this before, but I wanted to show it pictorially. Aleph, Mem, Taf. Now, if you look at those three letters, they all stand on what we say on 2 feet. Aleph is standing on 2 feet, the Mem standing on 2 feet, and the Taf is standing on 2 feet. And we stand on 2 feet. We are firmly planted on the ground if we are filled with emes. Emes meaning truth. The truth of understanding what has Hashem given us. What is this Mishkan that we've got? How do we connect to Hashem? We connect to Hashem in truth. Now, the opposite of truth is falsehood. Sheker. Now, the right way around? It's color coordinated. Sheker, Shin Kuf Resh. Now, the Shin here is rounded, but if you look in Sefer Torah, Shin comes down to a point essentially. The Kuf has got a leg and the Resh has got a leg. The Kuf has got a very low leg, it drops below all the other letters. Shin Kuf Resh is Sheker. It's falsehood. It's those things that do not represent Torah. So if we look at it, Emet, the first letter, the middle letter, and the last letter of Aleph Beis. Emes is truth. It covers across the whole Torah. There's nothing but Emes if we are connected to Hashem. Sheker are three letters that are next to each other, except they're not in order. The order of the letters is completely out. That's false. So how do we get those letters in order? We go Kuf Shin Resh. I needed to animate this onto a PowerPoint, but it's much more fun doing it manually. Kuf Shin Resh, now it's in order. Kuf Shin Resh, Kesher, Kroshim, Keshorim are the beams of the temple. So, sorry, I've messed that up completely. Kuf Resh Shin. Keroshim, a keresh. I was looking at that the wrong way around. I apologize. Let's get this right. I printed it the wrong. I know exactly what happened. No, I know exactly what happened here. I remember this when I was playing with it last night, or very early this morning. Kuf Reshin, Keroshim, a keresh. A keresh is a beam in the Beis HaMikdash. We spoke about the beams in the temple. In the Mishkan, 48 beams in the Mishkan. It's not for naught that there were 48 beams, because the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says there are 48 ways to acquire Torah. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos in the 6th chapter says that Gedola Torah Yosem min HaKahuna u'min HaMalchus. Torah is greater than kahunas, a kohen, and greater than royalty, because Torah, let's just quickly, royalty and kahuna are given to people. A king becomes a king because he's part of the family of King David. A priest becomes a priest because he's part of the family of Aaron HaKohen. And also royalty has got 30 things attached to it. Priesthood's got 24 gifts. The Torah talks about 24 gifts that come to a Kohen, but Torah is acquired through 48 different qualities. There are 48 qualities to acquire Torah. This is something that many people will learn between Pesach and Shavuos. There's 49 days between Pesach and Shavuos. So you learn the 48 qualities that people that are discussed in this Mishnah. There's a sefer called Midrash Shmuel, which I've got here, which we learned last year in another shir I gave. And we went through the 48 different qualities that a person needs to have and will get when they learn Torah. The 48 qualities are, I'll just read some in English: study, attentive listening, articulate speech, intuitive understanding, discernment, awe, reverence, modesty, joy, purity, ministering to the sages, closeness with colleagues, sharp discussion with studies, deliberation, etc. Limit various different things that you don't need so much in your life, like you don't need so much sleep, less conversation, limited laughter, slowness to anger, good heart, etc. There's 48 qualities that a person acquires through the Torah, through emes. And those 48 kroshim, those 48 beams in the Beis HaMikdash, in the Mishkan, were there to represent that. And they were there to show us some unity. There's unity needed within the Jewish people. How did we have that unity? So we discussed the bars, the poles that ran around the Mishkan, that ran around the central part of the Mishkan. There was a pole at the top that I said was attached with rings. It was attached in and slotted in. On the inside of the Mishkan, you had this pole running around on the north side, on the south side, and on the west side. 3 separate poles at the top and 3 separate poles at the bottom. Rashi brings, when he discusses that it seems like there were 2 poles there, and it looks like you could get to 15 poles if you read Rashi in some kind of a way. I'm not quite clear on that Rashi. I tried to go through it this morning to see how I could get it, how it works out. Not 100% clear, but it looks like you can get to 15 with those 2 at the top on each side, but there was one central pole. There was one pole that went in the side, did a right angle turn across the back, did a right angle turn across the back to come through and down the other side. So let's just say it started on the north, went all the way down the north, went down the west, and came back up the south. One pole. Now, picture how this could work physically. You can't, because you've got a wooden beam with a hole drilled in the middle of it, joining into another wooden beam. So if you've got a straight line, that's fine. I can push a thing through. How do I now turn a right angle on a solid piece of metal? It's not physically possible. And it said that beam was put in there completely miraculously. It was not possible to get it in there. The only way you could get it in is if you drilled out the sides and you forced it in. But it wasn't. It was through a hole completely in the middle. And that showed us that these kroshim were there to hold the Mishkan together, to hold the Jewish people together in unity. What we've seen in the last week, and I don't want to get too political, in fact I don't want to get political at all, but sometimes we have to, was the most horrific display on behalf of those people that are holding our people captive and hostage. Firstly, the way they've released every one of the hostages has been a terrible, terrible mockery and a show. The way they released the 4 bodies of 2 babies, of what wasn't their mother, what was an elderly gentleman, Oded Lifshitz, was beyond anything that we can accept. I'll give them a little bit of credit. Perhaps they messed up with Shiri Bibas's body. Perhaps. Let's just say they did. Let's just say they were given the wrong body. It doesn't excuse it. There's no excuse whatsoever to behave like that. It's absolutely, and they've proven to the world that they are not the rightful people to live in that part of the world. And in that respect, Donald Trump is right. Move them on, because they do not belong there. They never did. They never ever did. They were imported by the Ottoman Empire 150 plus years ago or thereabouts. from various parts of North Africa, from parts of the Arab world. There was no such people called the Palestinian people. They do not exist. They never existed in the world. And if they can prove that their families were there 300 years ago, they can't. There's no ways they can. There were a few Arabs in the land of Israel. There are some Jewish people in the land of Israel. And as the wave of the first Aliyah started, firstly with the Vilna Gaon students, and then the people, as the pogroms in Europe were getting worse in the early and mid 1800s, and people started moving to Israel, the Ottoman Empire, which was in charge, decided, oh, hang on, we can't have more Jews in this land than we've got Arabs. Let's move Arabs in here. They do not belong there, they never were there, and they never should be there. And we need to know that. We need to know that through those 48 ways of acquiring Torah, we will bring Hashem's presence back to this world. Through those 48 ways of acquiring Torah, we elevate ourselves to a point whereby we can connect to Hashem. We can get Hashem to dwell within us. When Hashem dwells within us, then we see miracles. Then we see how potential mass murderers get thwarted because they set the time wrong in a bomb, 3 bombs. We found 2 others. How it's beyond the physical that these kind of things can happen. Their intention was that October 7, it seems like, should have been child's play, and they were thwarted completely. But we're not quite there yet. As we discussed before the show, we're discussing hundreds of thousands of people celebrating a funeral. We're not there yet. So let's just look at some of these 48 ways and these connections to the Mishkan, because if we elevate ourselves, if we change ourselves and we move one little bit, as we discussed last week about kashrus, if we can change something that we do, and we can say to Hashem, I'm changing one small part of my life. Hashem doesn't ask us to change our lives completely, because there is no ways we can dive into the deep end of a pool if we can't swim. We need to get in the shallow end with our water wings on. But every single one of us needs to do something small, something that takes us from our physical beings and connects us spiritually to Hashem. Just transforming a little bit of the physical into spiritual. So these kroshim, they were made from wood. We said it was shittim wood, it was acacia wood. They were covered in gold. And each of the materials in the Beis HaMikdash, in the Mishkan that we discussed, the Aron was wood on the inside, gold on the outside, gold on the inside. I heard in a shir from Rabbi Schwartz yesterday, he said, he once asked one of the Gedolim, how is it possible that the Aron was like this? What does this all mean? And he said, if you take a Talmid Chacham, a great person, anybody who sits and learns Torah, anybody who's connected to Hashem needs to be the same on the outside and the inside. That's our goal. That gold on the outside and the inside needs to sandwich our whole essence, physical and spiritual, inside of us, so that we can be connected to Hashem, both the way we think and the way we behave, both the way we behave towards ourselves and the way we behave towards everybody else.
Where did they get all this gold from? Gold.
Hashem gave it all to us, not only gold, everything else. So it says that the acacia wood, where they get wood from, in the middle of a desert, the shittim wood, Yaakov Avinu took down saplings to Mitzrayim, or he took seeds to Mitzrayim, or small, whatever it was, trees which were planted. The 210 years we're in Egypt, those trees were then cut down when we left Egypt and taken out with us to make all of these things. Hashem provided all of this. It says the tablets, the second set of tablets that Moshe carved out, Hashem said, go and carve out these tablets. It's brought down that Hashem placed that under Moshe's tent. So that was one part of it. The second part of it was when we left Egypt, remember we went to the Egyptians to get gold, silver, and garments from them. Each of the people donated some of that gold and silver that they brought out. The question, it's a good question, but where did they get a massive piece of gold to make the menorah from? It was one piece of gold. It was hammered out. Hashem must have provided some huge pieces of gold there in the desert for them. But good question. So there's 48 ways to acquire Torah. We mentioned there were 48 cities of Levim. We mentioned the cities of Levim were places where people could run to as a city of refuge. We transform physical to spiritual through these 48 krashim. It's brought down in the Gemara in Megillah that there were 48 prophets. There were 7 prophetesses and 48 male prophets. Focusing on those 48 prophets, their job was to convey messages from Hashem to the Jewish people. There were far more than 48 prophets. There were thousands of prophets. They used to have Prophet University, where people would go and elevate themselves. Obviously, they need to learn and be at a very high level, but they would go and learn how to receive messages from Hashem. And so you get a degree in a Bachelor of Prophecy, or Propheting, I don't know, with a PH, not an F. And so Hashem communicated to Moshe. Moshe, we know, we in the Animamins, we say that Moshe was the greatest of all the prophets. And Moshe spoke to Hashem panim al panim, face to face. But every one of the prophets, Hashem spoke to them. And so we need to try and get ourselves to a level where we can try and connect to Hashem. We need to take our lave. Lave is 32, Lamed base. And we need to add 16. And as I said, I tried to work out the poles. I was trying to play with this. And I think if we learn Rashi, that there were 5 poles on each side, the middle pole being miraculous, we get to 16 poles. I'm not convinced on this one yet, but I'm still working on it. But that comes to that 48. So just like our heart needs to be connected to Hashem, we need to take that 48 of the 48 beams around the Mishkan. And the Mishkan was the place where Hashem kissed the earth. Hashem were connected to us. But our job is to connect to Hashem. Our job is to say to Hashem, I want to be close to you. I would like to be part of your people. I want to be unified. I want Jewish people to be in unity. As we've seen in the last 15 months, on October 6th, we were the most disunified people imaginable. But since then, on October 7 and 8, we became unified, and there was unity. And again, I think over the last few days, despite, maybe because of the horrific circumstances of the way the hostages and the bodies of the hostages were released, maybe we're showing that unity again, because our goal is to connect to Hashem. Our goal is to say, Hashem, take Kafir Bibas and Ariel Bibas, these 2 little red-headed children, and their mother, Shiri Bibas, and Ode Lifshitz. Those people, those 4 people, as well as all the others that have been killed, are sitting in the highest of highest levels of Gan Eden with Hashem. They are in the top of the heavens. There's no question about it. They had to suffer in horrific ways. For whatever reason Hashem brought that, we cannot understand. But all we can say is our emotional response needs to be not one of anger with those perpetrators. It needs to be one of davening and connecting to Hashem. Say to Hashem, please stop all of this. Stop suffering of Jewish people. Please send Mashiach now. And the merit of us connecting through these 48 ways of Torah to just making one small step to get closer to Hashem, to take our heart and say to our Father in heaven, say, Hashem, we want to be connected to you. Then Hashem will send Mashiach speedily in our time.